Baytown is really in the middle of the region where Texas won its independence. So it seemed like a logical progression for us to build a statue of Sam Houston. This statue fits so perfectly into that theme that we've all adopted. Each city has adopted a gateway to it that is somehow related not only to the history of that city, but tying it into the history of the region. And in my mind, this is just a crowning jewel, if you will, to the story of this region and to the importance that this region has in Texas history.
Well, when I was commissioned to do an equestrian statue of Sam Houston pointing towards San Jacinto for a roundabout, a big traffic circle in Baytown, I thought there are a lot of equestrian statues around. Of course, the one in Herman Park is the best one of Sam Houston per se, but it's got so much details in it, and it's bronze, that it's meant to be walk right up to it and look up and study all the little ins and outs of the thing. Whereas this one is going to be on a traffic circle that you're going to be 70 feet away from it. So I decided to do something that would have the most impact from that kind of distance, especially when you're going pretty fast. So I decided on him having a lot of rhythm and motion in him. And I've studied equestrian statues everywhere. Like recently I was in Vienna. I decided to make it, as I said, as rhythmical as possible. So I have the horse's head doing that, and the mane doing that, and his tail doing that, and his leg doing that, and him. So there's a lot of rhythm in it that I thought was best for some statue that you're seeing from a distance rather quickly. When you're doing something big, you have to start with something small, obviously. So I had a clay model about that big to get the rhythm in it. So then I blew that one up to one that's about 5 feet tall, just to get more details and study proportions. What I'm doing is copying the contours of all these elements along the neck, so we can take that curve and multiply it by 2.5 and do big ones for the big ones. So this model here is 40% the size of the big one. So I have to multiply every dimension here by 2.5 to get the big one. Six. Seven and 8. This is a homemade contour device. It's to get one of these shapes so we can take it over here and multiply it by 2.5 to cut out the big ones for the big one. How do I get those exact shapes? This is the way we do it. And we touch all the points with the end of these skewers. They can slide up and down, they can move around. So then once we've touched all the points, we take this over to a table and we draw a line where all those points would have touched the floor. We draw that line, and then that line we just mathematically multiply it by 2.5. I found my favorite medium for doing big stuff is styrofoam because it's so easy to cut, easy to glue together. So what we did was build a skeleton, in effect, and then apply foam to it. The foam is in 3-inch thick layers. So I just put all those pieces together, and it ends up being pretty much the shape I'm looking for. After that, there's a lot of cutting and adding and subtracting to make it like it's supposed to look eventually. We took dimensions off of the styrofoam model and multiplied them by a given number. I think it was 5.4. something like that. And Chewy did that, Big Chewy, and he just measures from here to there and cuts the steel to fit those dimensions. He didn't have to make a big drawing. Covered it over with expanded metal lath, and then applied the concrete directly to that. When I created the legs of the horse, each one was different than the other, obviously. So I'd have to get the angle that it hit the ground, if there's three of them on the ground, and one in the air, and how the hoofs would look in the air as opposed to on the ground. So it was just copying the models and all the photographs I'd had of horses and everything to just try to make that look right. You know, for many people, modern life couldn't exist without duct tape. It's so totally useful and necessary, or Velcro. But to me, hot knife and styrofoam are two ingredients that are essential to life, at least my life. The styrofoam model will serve only as a model to make a rubber mold off of, and then pour heavy-duty concrete into the rubber mold. But there'll be no foam in the final deal at all. Okay, there it is. This is a 40% model of the tail itself. And I wanted to show you this to show how the rhythm I'm trying to get in the tail is more my style than the classic tail on the horse at Herman Park. The rhythm part of everything is so important to me in this that I've done lots of photographs of horses running with their tails, how long they are, how they switch around, which direction they do. And that's all part of the data that's necessary to design a final product. The tail and the mane and the head of the horse are so complicated that I'm not going to try to carve them up there like that, but do these. This is the tail, I'll show you in a second, and then make a rubber mold of it and cast the concrete in the rubber mold like we do the president's heads. That'll be true with the mane on the horse and the horse's head. Now, I've got two versions of this that are swishing both ways. One of them I don't know, want to make it like that, or like that, or just what the swish will be. This is the other one, and it's better from this side. It's got that kind of, the tail, the hair of the tail, how it swishes around. But that will, be probably something like that. That's to make that thing a little bit rounder. You know, people are driving by at 50 miles an hour, seeing this from 100 feet away, they're going to wonder, why isn't that tail hair smoother? And just anticipating that question, I'm here today to make it smoother, because I'm a nice guy. The saddle, we're trying to get the style that existed back then, and the saddle horn back then, they were quite different than they are today. So we're trying to get one of that style. The details on the saddle bag and everything are pretty much the same that is on the bronze in Herman Park. That was taken from an original painting done by S. Seymour Thomas in 1893. But I also wanted to simplify it and not have all the little details, the carving on the saddlebag and all that, because this is more of a streamlined, smoother version. It's easier to make it in clay and cast it than to try to carve concrete while it's wet. Again, you only have a window of an hour or two to be able to carve concrete before it hardens and you can't carve it anymore. So that's why we chose to do rubber molds on a lot of the thing that does have detail in it. The spurs were pretty typical of the period. I don't think spurs have changed much over the ages. And we just made all those out of steel and cast. Even the spurs are little bits of cast concrete over a little shaped metal. The boots, we again looked at the painting and looked at the one in Herman Park to get the length and the style of the boots. I'll get the whole legs with the spurs and the whole thing pretty much finished, and then make the rubber mold of that, and then take it off and take him off and put him on the ground so that this is touching the ground, and then I can work on the rest of the body at the right height. That's about where it wants to go there. The stirrup straps were created by bending metal mesh into the shape and width of the straps. Then concrete was applied to that. It really wasn't that different from all the other details on the horse. To create the horse's head, actually I got a lot of photographs from the internet of horses' heads. There's a variety of shapes. So I picked the one that I thought would be most appropriate, that fit the original painting the best. By the way, Sam's horse was named Saracen. You knew that. So it was a male horse. It got killed in the Battle of San Jacinto. So I found the right shape of horse's head that I thought would be appropriate for that. Then carved it with styrofoam, very much like I carved everything else. You know, horses have eyelashes, and the shape of their eyes is very much like a woman. Big eyelashes, curved. People don't notice that about horses. Speaking of styrofoam, this house, I made it 39 years ago, and it's made of styrofoam. 4-inch styrofoam panels sandwiched between concrete on the outside, about 1 inch, and 1/8 of an inch of concrete on the inside. So that's the reason it's quiet, and the air conditioning works very well because it's so insulated. So styrofoam has been part of my well-being for a long time. I saw a film last night on Salvador Dali. What a character. I visited him once in Port Ligat in 1965, and he even showed me his studio and took me all around the house and all the rest. And that's all shown in these films. So it was like reminding me of that trip. What he's doing now is applying our spectral mixture to the styrofoam to fill out the areas where it needs it. And our mixture is what we call bolitas, which is styrofoam ground up, so it's almost like snow or BBs, with a joint compound mixture that is lightweight, yet it fills up a lot of gaps. Then smooth that with sandpaper and then more clay to get all the details of the nostrils and the eyes how far apart they had to be in the ears. And the funny thing about ears, if a horse is scared, I think the ears do that. But if he's going along normally, something like that. And anyhow, we try to get the ears pointing in the right direction. And then, of course, the bridle, all that. There are lots of different styles of bridles, so we had to just pick the one we thought would be appropriate for the time. For the horse's mane, most statues that you see, it's either cut short, it's just across the top of his neck, or it's hanging down on the side, not doing much. But I had to have mine blowing in the wind to follow the whole concept of the flow of air, the tail and everything. So I did the main. First I cut out foam shapes that were stuck on the original full-scale model. They looked kind of like bananas in a way. They were stuck, that tried to make a shape, and they didn't work. So we got rid of that idea, and Chewy put on layers of concrete, 3 layers, so that I would have an hour or so to carve the first layer, then build that up and build that up. So he laid the concrete, so I just by hand carved what I thought the base would look like. And then he came back an hour or 2 later, put on a second coat, about an inch thick, so I carved those. And then a third coat, a little bit for the highlight. Then once we got it up there and got back and started looking at it from far away, I saw he needs to have more main. So we're going to have to go back and add on another inch or 2 on top of that. I just didn't make it big enough is the problem. So I decided we're going to make a rubber mold of that whole thing and pour that and put that rubber mold up on the horse's head. For Sam's torso, I had to figure out what sort of costume what his dressing would look like at that period. And so I pretty much went back to the original painting that's at the San Jacinto Battleground of what that looked like, and just tried to copy that on the smaller model, then on the bigger one, then on finally the big one. I just cut out sections of foam, stacked them up on a steel bar, and then carved and pushed back and forth to get the shape. The belt here will be part of the overall cast uniform, cast in a rubber mold. Whereas the belts below the saddle that are on the horse already were done by hand. They just applied concrete over the existing concrete. So That's the difference in the belts. After you're gone, keep on crying. After you're gone, in another night. On the piece that you're making the rubber mold of, you put a thin coat of rubber, which is silicone. We use tube silicone, and build up about a ½ inch coating on the whole thing. When pulling the plaster mold or the mother mold off of the rubber mold, to ease its releasing, you grease down the mother mold first with paper, thin paper. We chose napkins, they're available, so that the plaster doesn't grab every little pore of the rubber, making it hard to pull off. And so that seam where the two pieces are has to be stronger than the rest of it and thicker. So, and easy to pull out. Rather than cutting it with a knife, you put all those little cards in there first and then build the rubber up to those cards. So these two halves are already separated. The rubber never touches each other. So then when they peel it off, it's easy to peel off. When that's taken off, it's just a rubber blanket. So there has to be something that it fits into to keep its shape. So around that, we do a plaster mold, depending on how big it is, but you have to have maybe a lot of support to keep it in one piece. When the plaster is made, take it off, cut the rubber mold, peel it off, put that half in that side, that half in that side. So then you have a perfect mold in which to apply the concrete. When the rubber is pulled off, it'll pull off a little bit of the concrete. And so you have to clean all the debris out so that it's smooth rubber, because what you pour in the rubber, the concrete is going to be reflected by that. So you don't, if I'd left any debris in there, that would be part of the cast of the concrete. You don't want that. So the concrete is applied in about 5 layers. The first layer, you just paint it in, be sure it gets everywhere. You don't pour it in. You paint it in because it's only going to be an inch thick when it's finished. You don't want it solid. The second coat would be fiberglass mesh to strengthen it. So that's cut and laid in there in strips, back and forth, back and forth. And then another layer of concrete. Then finally, strips of steel band, about 1 inch wide and 1/8 of an inch thick, are laid in there to match the shape. So all that steel is in there, made purposely so that when the two halves go together, the steel matches, and then get in there and weld all those points, and then that makes the final object. So if it's right, we're going to weld, right? If it's correct, you're going to weld inside? All right, let me double check. Okay, he's good. Let's weld. Yeah. Yeah, está bien. So, sure. After it's welded in, to lift the top half off, just lift it off, the box?
Yeah.
All right, okay.
And take it out and put it back.
Yeah. Well, the arms, of course, have to be made separately. Same rubber mold concept as the other. But in this case, his right hand has to be pointing towards San Jacinto. And then the left hand has to be holding both reins, because the rein from the right and left side of the horse's head, he's holding in one hand while he's pointing with the other hand. So that hand had to be made so that the reins could come in and hold them. Cleaning up that finger, San Jacinto. His head should be about that big. So, got it wrong. His hat should be there. There's a profile. There's the back of his head. So I'm going to make this do 4 of these because I need that much width, and I'll start carving. When the foam is all put together, then I start working on the actual details of that person's face. All faces are different, so try to make it look like Sam as he was at that age. So that's all created the right scale. It's got to be, like 2.4 times life size, more or less. And so that's how that's done. So in doing this one, in that it's a lot larger than life size, I had to first create in styrofoam a head that was the right scale of Sam. I apply clay and work on it with small instruments, little knives and other little sculptures instruments, to get all the expression I want on his face. Then after that clay is done, that's when we make the rubber mold, and we apply the rubber to that. He had his sleeping bag was stolen or something, and he had to sleep on his blanket, his horse blanket, at night. It was a real, and there were deserters. These were all volunteers that came from their farms to fight against Santa Anna, and some of them would desert and go back home, and finally, so many of them had deserted that he dug 3 graves in the ground and pointed to those and says, "The next deserter is going to end up in one of these," and that pretty much cured the desertion problem. He had a plan. It was to extend the forces of Santa Anna and Cos. There are 2 generals involved, 2 separate armies. Get them as far away from their base, supplies and all that they would start running low on everything, and it worked. The Battle of San Jacinto was only 18 minutes long, and something like 750 Texans against Santa Anna's army of 2,000 or 3,000. It was just amazing. One of the great game-changing battles in the history of the United States, thanks to this guy here. The hat, I tried to match the kind of hat he would have worn in that period. And not the real cowboy hat, that's all recent, that's this century. So I bought a couple of hats that I could bend around. I tried to bend them and get one that was the closest one that I imagined it would be. So I pretty much copied that shape for his hat. The one I'm just cutting out now goes on his head, and it's just obviously too flat. It doesn't have any shape to it, but it will pretty soon. This up there and start trying to see if it's about right, so that he looks like that, Big Sam, see? Then the cape produced a little bit more of a problem there, because the cape had to have a certain rhythm to go with the overall. So a cape flies in the breeze. It can be any way you want it to be. So I chose to have it curl a certain way which would benefit the whole overall rhythmical concept of it. So doing the curve of the cape was important. And what I did is I set up with a piece of carpet a cape on the middle size model and pinned him up there with skewers and whatnot to get the right look I wanted. So then when we did the life-size cape, we had to do it on the big styrofoam model, because that is the exact size as the final deal. Chewy bent 1-inch steel, strap steel, to get those various shapes, then welded all that together, then tied metal lath onto that with wired metal lath onto all those steel shapes, then applied the concrete directly onto the lath and smooth it with a piece of foam rubber to smooth it after you'd gotten it on. So it's quite a nice smooth shape, which is a cape should be, and the steel in it was erected so that two big pieces could go right through a hole in the butt of the horse that welds it from the inside. So the cape itself is held by two welded points. I was not going to do the sword at all, because it just kind of complicates the streamlined simplicity of the statue. Then I started thinking, he's going into battle at San Jacinto. He doesn't even have a weapon. He'll have to have a sword. So I'm doing a sword for him now. And I've calculated that the sword has to be a little under 6 feet long to go from under his hand down to where it's supposed to be. So I'm going to cut out, this is 3 feet, cut out half of it, and then the other half, and do it in foam as I always do, and then the foam is worked over and it's finally made a rubber mold of the foam. I don't think I'll wear these glasses. I hope it'll inspire people a little bit and think he was a great man and that was a great battle, and there's a piece here to remind us of that. That's what artists want to accomplish, just to do something that'll be around a long time, that will have some meaning to somebody.
it's important for us to have this particular piece of sculpture because it's something that's going to last for generations. The thing about sculpture, particularly well done sculpture, is that it will be there not for the next week. It's not a moving exhibit that will be gone in a month or 6 months or a year, but generations of future residents of our city can enjoy the sculpture and marvel at the talent that David Adickes brought to the world.
One could likely ask why I didn't do it right the first time, huh? Not the way art works.